The Darkness of My Soul. Written by S.P.Dorning. The metal bulkhead was discolored by the stain of time, and it felt as if I was staring at a representation of my own soul. After all, what had I accomplished in my brief 34 years of life? I was an accomplished introvert who had served aboard the salvage ship Trieste for the last 12 years, picking the remains of broken vessels found floating out on the rim of Sector 36. I had no family, and the few friends I had were dead now. There had been no further interaction since I woke up. Perhaps my story was destined to end here. So, what had been the purpose of my brief existence? I still wasn't sure what had happened. The Trieste had been returning to Starport Vixen 9 after a successful salvage operation, when we had come across a bonus, an ancient relic of a freighter. The hull was badly damaged from the impact of space debris, the name and registration had almost been scratched beyond recognition, but we managed to identify it as the Excalibur. According to the file we had on her, she had been one of the first cargo vessels, equipped with the Translite drive. Those were the early versions of the Garrison engine, the method we use now, for faster-than-light travel. The Excalibur had been lost over a decade ago. It had been taking farming and medical supplies to a colony in the Beta system. The Translite drives had been an utter failure. They had worked perfectly for short jumps, but after prolonged use, the navigation systems would break down. Whole ships had vanished using them. They would just launch into transwarp and never be seen or heard from again. Every once in a while, you would find the skeletal remains floating free in odd places, with no clue as to what had happened to them. Just empty husks, devoid of life. The possibility that there was still some of those supplies on board was too good for Captain Hamby to pass up. She had reasoned that it was on our way, and we still had some room left for possible loot. I bet she was regretting that decision now. If she was even still alive. Scans had returned showing no life on board. The hull, though battered, was intact. There was atmosphere, but no signs of power. It hadn't taken us long to establish a hard lock, and we had restored power to emergency systems using the Trieste's remote generators, bypassing most of the old security protocols easily. The technology of the Excalibur had long been surpassed. Johnson, Riggs, and I had been the first ones on board. We had proceeded with caution, unsure of how well the ship itself had held up during its long drift. The hollow clangs and groans of creaking metal had caught me off guard at first. I had been on many derelict vessels, but none had been quite so empty feeling as the Excalibur had. It wasn't just the feeling of an absence of life, as much as it felt like a hatred for it. The darkness seemed to hiss and retreat from the lights of our suits, as if we were attacking it, but the things that appeared within those circles of light were just normal items, relics of everyday life aboard a starship. We had managed to make it to the first of the cargo bays when it happened. The captain's voice crackled to life over the intercom in our helmets. I could hear the collision alert klaxon sounding in the background as she warned us of incoming debris. We barely had time to brace, as the whole ship shook and chaos erupted. Pipes burst, and bulkheads crumpled. I remember being slammed to the floor, and the emergency lights flickering, and finally going out. Johnson died in that chaos. I'm not really sure how long I lay in darkness. I wasn't even sure if I had blacked out, or not. There was a crushing weight on my back, holding me securely, but not pinning me. I had to be extremely careful, while pulling myself out from under it. The suit was fairly tough, but it could be punctured by sharp metal. The Excalibur was dead, again. Apparently, whatever had happened, had severed the power supply being generated by the Trieste.
Johnson. Riggs. You both okay?
My voice was loud in my helmet, but I didn't know if it was being transmitted to them, or not. I stood up shakily, and looked around. Johnson lay on his back, 3 feet away. His suit lamp speared into the darkened recesses of the ceiling above. A long pipe of sharpened conduit had pierced the chest piece of his suit, pinning him to the catwalk of the floor. Blood was leaking through the hole, where the conduit exited from his back. He wasn't moving. I moved over to his side, looking for signs he was still alive, but I knew, even before I saw his face through his visor, that he wasn't. We had been trained in some emergency scenarios, about what to do in certain situations, but it was only basic survival techniques. Things like, make sure your suit is intact, or keep an eye on your oxygen supply, but those things didn't immediately surface in my mind. Instead, I stared at my dead friend's corpse in shock. It wasn't until I heard Riggs' voice crackle in over short-range comms, that I came to my senses.
Alan? Alan? Can you hear me?
Static, cut in and out of the transmission, hiding some of the words.
Riggs. Oh, thank God. Alan. Myers. Copy that. Door.
Riggs' voice was panicky, and the static made me think his suit could be damaged as well.
Hang on.
Hearing my friend in need, spurred me to action. I stooped down, and unplugged the lamp module from Johnson's suit, trying to avoid his accusing stare.
Sorry. You don't need them anymore?
I unplugged my own module, and dropped it to the floor, replacing it with Johnson's, refocusing it to better see with. It didn't seem quite as bright as it had on his suit. I checked my heads-up display, and noticed my battery power was getting low. I looked over his suit for a battery pack. As I reached to unplug it, his cold-gloved hand clamped down on my wrist, like a vice. My heart leapt into my throat, as I scrambled back gripping the battery, trying to pull away from him. Static blasted into my helmet as I stumbled and landed on my backside. I had scooted back several more feet before I realized, his suit was still in the same position I had first found it in. I blinked the sweat out of my eyes, confused. What had just happened? Had I just imagined it?
Alan? Alan? What?
Riggs still needed my help. I shook my head and turned to look for him. He was lying on his back, with his right leg stuck between the sliding bulkhead doors. His leg was trapped between them with a piece of metal pipe, that was just a bit smaller than his leg. It was all that kept the door from amputating his leg. It only took a moment to find the hydraulics, and bleed it off enough, that I could pry the doors open, and free him.
What happened?
I don't know. Comms went out at the same time the power went black. It sounded like something hit the tree, yes sir. It may have hit the Excalibur too. If it was big enough and hit hard enough, it could have ruptured the hardlock. Maybe even damaged the Excalibur's hull.
How long has it been since it happened? I think I blacked out.
The static was gone. His suit antenna had come loose in the confusion. When I patched it back together, his signal came back, loud and clear.
I don't know for sure.
I glanced down at my oxygen gauge. It was showing almost 2/3 of the way depleted. That meant, I probably had enough air to last for another 2 hours or so.
What about Johnson?
He didn't make it.
Have you heard from the captain?
Not since the shake-up.
I leaned down and helped Riggs to stand. We moved back into the room where Johnson lay. The door hadn't closed between the two rooms, but there was enough debris in front of the other exits, that we wouldn't be able to open them without help. Riggs didn't appear to have noticed yet. I eased him down against the bulkhead and then sat down beside him. We were trapped.
How much air do you have left?
What?
Riggs tore his eyes off of the corpse and looked back at me.
Oh, about 1/4 of a tank. Do you think that will be enough?
Take it, just came and take it.
The voice came from close to my right ear, from just outside my helmet. Or had it, maybe I had imagined it.
I don't know.
Is there any left on him?
Riggs motioned toward Johnson's body.
I don't know.
I repeated, as I felt his cold hands clamp down on my wrist again. I shivered.
I'll check in a little bit. Let's rest some. Conserve what we can. Maybe they are already trying to get back to us.
Yeah. Maybe.
He didn't sound like he believed it either.
I'm going to cut the lamp off for a bit. I need to save power, or it's going to start getting cold in this suit.
No.
Riggs almost shouted, and he sat up a bit straighter. His suit lamps had been damaged too.
I mean, we can spare the power for just a bit, can't we? I saw something move while I was trapped in there.
Don't be silly. This place has been empty for a long time.
You're probably right. It just seemed, I don't know, evil. Like, it wanted to swallow me up. You can use Johnson's battery pack if you have to. I just need the light.
I didn't bother to tell him I had gotten Johnson's battery already. The charge meter on my HUD was showing 3/4 full. I figured I'd be good for a while.
Okay.
Leaning my head back against the bulkhead, I closed my eyes. I would just rest for a second. Something woke me up. A whispering voice. It had sounded almost gleeful. What had it said?
We got him now too.
Riggs.
I said quietly. I was almost scared to breathe.
What?
His voice sounded raspy. But he answered.
Are you okay?
Yes. Just really tired.
He sounded weak. And he never moved while we were talking.
We got him, just look inside the visor, just look.
The voice was once again beside my right ear, just outside my helmet. I could hear a tapping on the hard shell, like claws scrabbling to find purchase against the plastic. My blood had turned to ice in my veins. I didn't want to look, but I had to. I had to know. I turned around slowly, to face Riggs. Angling my light to flood his visor, I eased up to look at him. Riggs stared out of the helmet at me, with black, empty eye sockets. His flesh was pale, and his lips were bloodless. His visage was gaunt and locked in an endless scream of terror and pain. I stumbled backward and tripped over Johnson's corpse, falling to the ground, and knocking the conduit that pinned it to the floor free. Riggs never moved. The voice outside my helmet laughed maniacally, with the accompanying sound of skittering claws dancing around my helmet, just out of view of the visor.
Now there is but one to join us soon, very soon.
No.
I screamed.
Shut up. Get off me.
What is it?
Riggs' voice floated to me without the crackle of intercom static. Like he was in the room without his helmet, talking to me in the open air.
What's wrong?
Riggs. Is that you?
Who else would it be? I told you, it wanted me. It wanted us.
What wanted us?
The darkness. I'm part of it now. Soon you will be too.
Where is it? Where did it come from? How do I fight it?
The malicious laughter followed my last question. I scrambled to my feet, again looking for the source.
You don't.
Came Johnson's reply. I looked down in horror as his corpse latched onto my ankle with its bony hands. Fear grabbed my throat just as hard, and my heart tried to beat its way out of my chest. It was too much. I couldn't take it. And then the blackness closed in. I opened my eyes and stared at the ceiling. The room was lit by bright white fluorescent lights. I was in sickbay, back aboard the Triessa.
Alan? Are you okay? Can you hear me?
Yes, my mind was fuzzy. What happened?
I'm not sure myself. All I know is that the hard lock on the Excalibur ruptured and tore loose. That caused the hull to breach. It was like a chain reaction after that. The time-weakened hull of that derelict just folded. Luckily, you were somewhere in the middle.
Riggs. Johnson.
I'm sorry, they didn't make it. But if either one of them had survived, you wouldn't have. Scavenging their suit tanks and battery packs was the only thing that kept you alive long enough for us to reach you. Quick thinking. You look pale.
Are you okay? Let me go get you some more pain meds.
The laughter sounded from somewhere behind my right ear. I could see my hand pulling the hose loose from Riggs' tanks. Had I done it? Had I killed my friend? My head pounded and felt thick as the doctor came back and gave me some pain meds and then left. I stared again at the metal bulkhead, with its now familiar discolored stain. What had happened on that dark and drifting derelict? Would I ever know for sure? If I did find out, would I be able to live with myself afterward?